Now about why we need laws. We're moving on to this section. Many things influence and contribute to what it's like to live in different countries. It even changes over time within the same country, and we could say that this is true of Canada, right? We've actually talked in our social class recently that our COVID experience makes us more aware of where our food comes from and where our boundaries and borders are and how international, people are coming and going, or just how much we rely on different services that, when we all got sent home and everything was shut down, that grocery workers still had to work, or truckers were out there moving the product to get it to stores and restaurants, but they couldn't find places to even use the bathroom because so many places had closed to the public, for example. And we just become more aware of that because of what we've gone through with COVID. So we know that even the laws within a country can change, and you've just been through that. You're currently going through that. And it's also a part of whether it seems comfortable and safe to live there or not. So if you look at the images below, they depict a society with control and without it. So the pictures that you have here, you've got kids that are out at the playground, families that are able to go out on vacation, people that are out shopping in malls. This would be a safe society, right? Environment 1 is a safe society as far as laws go. For example, I don't know if any of you follow on social media that Dr. Hassan.
Whiteside?
What's that?
Said his name.
Hassan Whiteside?
Yeah.
Did you just pop something out of your head?
That's his person. I was wondering if that's his name.
You know someone with that name?
Well, I don't know him. I know all of them. He's a celebrity.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I'm not talking about him. Sorry, I thought something just came out of your mouth because you let it. Okay. This doctor is the ER doctor that dealt with the Humboldt bus crash when all of those victims came in. He's also someone that posts regularly about, what's happening in hospitals in the last number of months, for example. He's currently on holidays in Istanbul, or he was at a conference, a medical conference. And he just posted here on social media the other day that it was like business as usual in a certain mall in Istanbul because people were given a QR code if they were vaccinated, so that they could go in, and it was kind of like their proof of vaccination, and therefore they were allowed to freely interact and mingle within this mall. So for him, it was an example of a safety setup, a safe society setup for protection. So you've got some things to consider. What do you think might have contributed to whether this society was safe or not, the one that we're looking at with the happy, everyone's doing their thing and outgoing? What contributed to establishing that sense of safety in the first place?
Like laws and regulations.
Yeah, you could put that there. Even as an example, there are certain laws that determine how many adults can be out there with how many children. You can't have too many children with only a few adults, for example. What types of expectations do citizens have of each other and of their leaders in a society that feels safe? Right? What do you think citizens expect of their leaders if they're living in an environment that seems generally safe? Protection. I think, based on the stuff that we're kind of seeing recently as well, that there's either trust or not trust, right? Of decision makers and what they're deciding. How are resources shared among the people in a regular functioning, everything's good society?
Equally.
Somewhat equally?
Resources are shared equally, somewhat.
You could say if they can afford it, for example. An example here is that when our March shutdown was first happening, when COVID was first becoming prevalent in our Canadian borders, there were people, well, even in the States, that went out and they bought out the whole collection of sanitizers, right? I think one of them was somebody had like a garage full of sanitizer in some place in Ontario or whatever. They got tracked down And it was collected and shared, right? You know, we have laws
And
that
sold for more money.
they were trying to sell for money. They were trying to make a profit off of the security threat or health threat or whatever. We have laws that are there to ensure against that type of monopoly, that people can't control that kind of stuff, and therefore set prices. What about who the decision makers might be and how they gain power? In a society that's functioning normally,
They all, like, each person who is voting age or whatever, they all get the opportunity to vote.
yep, opportunities. So we could say here choice of leaders, decision makers. By voting. I would look at these pictures and I would assume, okay, well, this isn't depicting North Korea, right? In North Korea, you wouldn't have a choice necessarily of leaders. You're going to be dictated on who your leader is, for example. So this here looks like a free society. What did you want to say?
Oh, I was just gonna say something about North Korea.
Do you need to say it? Do you really want to say it?
Oh, no, yeah, it's part of the topic.
Okay, let's hear it.
Lots of people like that are go to North Korea, because like they let some people in there,
Yes?
like as friends of the dictator or whatever.
Okay.
They say that like what the place looks like there is pretty much a normal like American state or whatever over there.
Okay.
But then like all the behind the curtains stuff.
It's the behind the scenes kinds of things. Anybody that's an outsider is allowed to see a certain element of their society.
It's like the Wizard of Oz.
Yes, that kind of an idea for sure. Yeah.
Or
In a different country, what were you going to say?
what's that?
In a different country, were you going to comment?
No, I was just making there's a movie about Tues show, like they have a show or whatever, like a reality show. Or,
Yeah.
I can't remember what the movie is.
Okay.
But they go to North Korea and then they're showing the fake North Korea, and then the show host that what's that? Do you know what that movie
They
is?
introduced Seth.
Yeah.
Oh,
the-
that?
Yeah.
Right.
That's funny.
That's pretty much-
Okay, but not reality, right? Okay. How safe do you think the people in these pictures feel? Do you think they even really question their safety or think about it much? I mean, the most that some like average person, maybe in Saskatchewan or a rural community, thinks about his safety is, you know, walking down the alleys at night, walking home from school at night, for
Or
example.
just like, yeah, in those areas, or like places in like Saskatoon.
Yes. So, I mean, but it's kind of like in certain locations where the safety is questionable, but in other places you wouldn't
Like
worry about
22nd
it.
Street or something like
Yeah, or the alphabet streets, they call them.
Yeah.
Okay. So level of safety is high, maybe taken for granted. And you can also think about if you're living in a pretty safe, pretty controlled, monitored environment where your needs are met, then there's other characteristics of a society that you pay more attention to, right? You know, there's issues of race, where there's inequality or bias that you pay attention to, or, you know, the wealth gap, the gap in who has money and who doesn't. Or like levels of education. You know, you can pay attention and work towards those things. Can you turn your phone off? Yeah, you can just put it right away. Thanks. So you pay attention to that stuff when your society is cared for. So as a summary here, you have a sense of safety, which I think everyone in this room generally has. In their communities, there is wealth where you can have spending. You know, your economy is working. You know, there's money coming in and there's money going out. You're making money and you're spending money. That's the working economy. And services are available to everyone. And so I'm not sure how much you would have seen firsthand the stark difference from March 2 years ago. For example, you know, when we did get sent home and people would venture out and do a little bit of grocery shopping, like there were a lot of empty shelves. No vegetables, flour, the flour aisle, because everyone was making their own bread. You know, all of that stuff was empty, especially. Yes, and especially like if you liked, you know, mini corns or oriental noodles, any of that stuff that was out of country, all of those things, bamboo shoots in cans, that kind of stuff, teriyaki sauce, all of that stuff was empty. And so it was a pretty eye-opening.
Peanut butter was something.
Just everything. And especially because people were unsure about their food security. Were there even going to be, you know, semis that could supply food? So people were really, well, toilet paper.
Yeah, people, yeah, like Costco, like, you know, there's usually
Yeah.
stacks. We went in there once, there was three
Yeah.
rolls.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, and so that was the big question. So here we have an environment number 2. This is clearly an unsafe environment, right? That's not to say that at times our safe society hasn't become temporarily unsafe. But if we're talking, I'll just say here that we're going to kind of talk about it in the long term. Here we could just put here that there's a lot of fear and a lot of lawlessness. Ideas, you know, there can be unlawful detention, ideas of unlawful detention. You know, if you're living in a society where people don't trust even the police or believe that there are valid reasons for an arrest, things like that. You know, if you're living down in Haiti or Venezuela as an example, maybe you're arrested and you know that you're not going to see a judge for a period of time. You know, your rights don't exist. You can be detained by people who are police officers but corrupt ones, right? And so in an unsafe environment, there isn't that trust in those officials and people in those positions.
Yeah, especially down in, I don't know specifically what countries are still, but there's many countries in the last 20 years that have been corrupt with gangs, cartels. So,
well, and not just at the gang or street level, but also in the levels of government, right? Mexico was an example for a while there where they found out that they were bribing politicians to steal their gasoline, right? Damage is done to, you could say, infrastructure, you know, like intentionally blowing up buildings or damaging oil refineries as a way to really damage the potential development of resources. Sorry, that should say infrastructure. Or slow reactions by emergency services. You know, Haiti is an example of a country. Haiti is on an island, and half the island is doing well and wealthy, and the other half is in dire poverty and remains there year after year, decade after decade. Partly because of the resources, but a large part of it is because of the politics. And, you know, for example, Haiti's been hit again recently by, what do you call it? Tsunami or hurricane or
What's it called? Cyclone.
something like that anyway, and again, took out all of their electricity, like not just in the neighborhood, electricity gone entirely, which means hospitals don't have it, which means morgues don't have it.
Generators.
It's just not there because there's no wealth to provide them or buy them, right? So when we look at this, for our experience, because we have experienced this now a little bit, beginning of pandemic, specifically when there were lots of questions.
Yeah, Iowa. Yeah, but it has to be the person's name.
Lots of questions and unknown. We had no idea what was to come, right? So the example there was people hoarding sanitizer. And the result is now, because we do still have a functioning society or legal system, that we have new laws to protect. Right? This can be temporary, right? And we have seen it. I think they said it's the 10-year anniversary, or we're past 10 years since the Vancouver riots after that hockey game. Roughly. So exactly.
Wait, what happened there?
So it was after the Vancouver hosted the last game of the Stanley Cup, I think, wasn't it? And so here's an example. I can pull this up in YouTube maybe.
Why is it because they lost, or?
I think it's that they lost. Guys, do you mind remind?
I'll provide live online classes through video chat.
For weeks, many have even asked us on a daily basis whether we would have a repeat of the '94 riot if the Canucks lost. The stories that were produced were often cringe-inducing. And for weeks, we predicted this day, this nightmare, this shame would never come. Despite those predictions behind the scenes, we had always been preparing for the worst. Last night, those preparations became a reality as we quickly shifted from a meet and greet tactic to one of crowd dispersal and crowd safety. Our lines were flooded and continue to be flooded today with tips from Vancouverites and others who want to help. Doctors in the crowd step forward to help with the injured. Our downtown hospitals performed in an outstanding manner. But even with those assets in place, our city was still vulnerable to a number of young men and women disguised as Canucks fans who were actually criminals and anarchists. These were people who came equipped with masks, goggles, and gasoline, even fire extinguishers that they would use as weapons. We recognize some of those same criminals among them as those who took part in the vandalism during the Winter Olympics. This criminal element within the crowd was responsible for the burning of 15 cars, including 2 police cars. As you saw, there was extensive property damage and looting. Our hearts go out to those businesses, especially the small ones, who suffered crippling losses last night. We understand that these types of losses can be devastating. While we had tripled the number of rioters last night, we were able to bring the situation under control in half the time it took us back in 1994. In 3 hours, the worst was over and most of the crowd had gone home. But I also want to assure our citizens that no one comes into our city and creates this kind of mayhem and destruction with impunity. We made close to 100 arrests last night, and we have every intention of making many more as we aggressively investigate the crimes that occurred.
So that was kind of an impromptu riot that happened in Vancouver, but they said that there were other elements of that where people were ready to join in and make it violent like that. And I tried this video here this morning. This is Nathan Kodalak. He was an Olympic hopeful.
My name is Nathan.
the audio wouldn't work for me this morning, so I'm surprised to see it. But this was a boy that went to the game and got involved with the riot once it had begun. So we talk about this idea of like mob mentality, we've talked about before, right? With mob mentality, if you can hide your identity, which people were able to do by covering faces, with clothing, for example. And if you watch different images from the riot, you could tell that people didn't, have masks necessarily per se, but they used like sweatshirts or things like that to cover up. By choosing to cover up and hide their identity, they became like the group. They weren't acting according to their own personal sense of right or wrong. We've studied this in psychology, that this is the mob mentality is a predictable part of human behavior, a predictable pattern of human behavior. That if you become part of a group, you don't make decisions based on your value set, you just do what you see, and it can quickly get out of hand. And so this is the case for this young boy who, like I said, was an Olympic hopeful and found himself in this mob and participated in it and was identified because, they had all of those cameras and, even back 10 years ago, people were recording it. That's even more so the case now. Everyone is recording everything with their phones. So like the January 6th riot that happened at Capitol Hill in America, lots of film coverage for people, the FBI to go through, right? And so this boy here had his apology that he wanted to make.
I apologize for having to read this statement, but I'm very nervous, and I have many things I need to say. I do not want to forget anything. I'm 17 years old. On Wednesday night, I went to Vancouver to join thousands of other people that were hoping to be part of a great Stanley Cup celebration. Not a riot. After the game, some people in the crowd started to get out of control. And at that moment, I made some very bad decisions. Ones that I now have to live up to. For reasons I can't really explain, I went from being a spectator to becoming part of the mob mentality that swept through many members of the crowd. I could have turned myself in quietly and taken shelter as a young offender. But I asked my father to make it possible for me to speak out today and have my name revealed. First, I want to say as clearly as I can, there is no excuse for my behavior. It does not reflect the values that my family and community raised me to live by. In a moment, I acted in a way that is an embarrassment to my family, my school, my community, the Vancouver Canucks, and the city of Vancouver. I am truly ashamed of what I did. Second, I want to also state very clearly that I recognize that I need to atone for what I did. My life took a very bad turn on Wednesday night based on choices I made. Now I must face the consequences. I did not attend my high school convocation yesterday because I did not want to detract from this special day that my classmates have worked towards all our lives. My actions have resulted in me being provisionally suspended from participation in the National Water Polo Program. I know that I will also be facing charges in court. I am not looking for any sympathy. I just want to make sure that people know that there have already been serious consequences and I anticipate there will be more. The third thing I want to do is start taking responsibility for what I did. I would like to send a message to the other people that were involved in the incident on Wednesday night to take responsibility for their actions and do the right thing. The people that came into Vancouver and volunteered to clean up the damage made by the mob reflect the true spirit of our community.
So that's a good enough thing there for that. So it can very quickly turn into an unsafe environment where people don't follow, the rules or that kind of all of that stuff that is established to protect society and protect individuals, right? There's a video clip that I want to play for you, and I think as far as our time goes, we'll start with that tomorrow. Are any of you familiar with the film Blindness? Blindness, it's on your...
No. I feel like
it is an old, now it's old. So to you, just wait, we're not done.
like 20 years
We
ago.
still have some more time. I don't know if it's that old, but we'll go through that part of it. But what you can do is you can start here and figure out whether you look it up on your phone, for example, or you can make up the lists yourselves. What are some real world examples that you know of or that you look up? where societies temporarily lost their rule and order in society. And it can be because of like a natural phenomenon. It can be because, tornadoes or things like that. Actually, another one we could talk about is New Orleans just got hit. This is 2021, where are we? September. There was just another tornado that hit New Orleans, for example. And there were a number of years ago where it got damaged so badly that there were like corpses floating in the floodwaters and things. Like New Orleans was a very bad catastrophe, for example, where a society temporarily lost their rule and order in society. We're coming up close to the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. 9/11 could be another example of, downtown.
September
The
11th.
Boston,
What
the
about
Boston.
Taliban?
Ooh, sorry. Downtown New York City, I'm just going to say that, there was lawlessness for that time. Well, for quite a while. Who else just said Boston bomber?
Yeah, the Boston bomber.
And also like the Taliban.
Sorry, the Boston bomber was that it was a couple of bombs and it was all made out of, what do you call it? When you're hit with shrapnel. Shrapnel bombs, right? And I don't know, shrapnel? I don't know if that's the right spelling. But those bombs were located with all of those like screws, bolts, washers, metal washers, intent to do great physical damage at the end of that Boston Marathon. And that's where people lost legs, limbs, runners were quite damaged by that. What else can you think of? There are some natural disasters that you could consider.
The riots that have been happening.
Would like the Taliban?
American, would we say American riots?
Sure. I don't know, what are the big ones?
They're not really happening in Canada, but we'll say American riots, and it's between this idea of Antifa versus I don't know what we would say. I don't really know how to label the other group that was going up against them. But I don't know that it's really necessary, to be honest. And you could use, and again, this is the example that we consume a lot of American media. But I remember I was here January 6th, and I don't know if it was an alert that came up, but I had it up. I was watching it live, and I had to go find someone to say, there's something really big happening, and it's a big deal. Because, it just was unthinkable that was happening then. I guess we're pretty fortunate that we haven't really lost, because even during COVID, I don't know, when we were sent home at the worst of it, for example, would you say that we lost our rule and order? People weren't looting businesses. They weren't breaking into abandoned homes, for example. Gasoline was still available, although that was a resource that it was questionable. We wanted to maintain those supply lines, for example. So you have a couple minutes here. You could think about what are the qualities of a society that is functioning, a functioning society versus a society in chaos. What are some of the things that you would look at as a condition of chaos versus a condition of function? And then the bell will go and we'll return tomorrow and start. I'll start with that clip from the film Blindness. It's a film about, because it's up here, it's a film about a virus, and it took over, but it made people blind. Anyone that was infected with it became blind, except for some reason there were one or two people that weren't impacted. Kind of like, what?
The show C. Yeah, Jason.
See, yes, that's another example.
They weren't.
You watched that show? That's a really weird show.
Else they would die. Was it? I never watched the show.
I wouldn't recommend it, to be honest.
Why?
There are some really
Very scary, probably.
Weird scenes.
What
It's
scene?
weird, it's weird, but it's like interesting.
What's this show called?
And where can I access it?
On Apple TV.
Oh, I was thinking like I Am Legend.
Oh, that one.
Oh, I like that movie.
That one's a sick movie.
You know, that's the same thing. He thought he was the only one. He hoped he wasn't. Those kinds of zombie shows where, you know, there are people unaffected by something. So in this film clip that we'll watch tomorrow, everyone's blind except one person. So you can imagine she assumes some power, can gain some power. Yeah.
No, I haven't.
Okay, I'll see most of you in ELA.